I wanted to tell you that I have been associated with the Society for Louisiana Irish for many years. And if you're a club member or a club officer or a member of your board, you know that if you do anything and do it well, they'll pile all kinds of work on top of you. So they've been really just piling it on me. And I'm 75 years old, so I'm at the point where I want to start getting rid of some of these jobs and spend more times doing nothing, which I enjoy doing. But I'm going to go ahead and start my program. If I can find it here. There we go. So I'm going to share my screen. And are you seeing that?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh my
Yes.
God.
Oh my gosh. Gorgeous.
Yes, our place is, we have 21 acres on Caddo Lake, which is a very historic lake. Write that name down, Caddo, C-A-D-D-O Lake, and later on Google that. Caddo Lake is where they drilled the first oil well over water anywhere in the world. So it's a very interesting lake. Of course, it's named for the Caddo Indians. But this is a picture from where I live. This is my sister's house. My brother-in-law is a retired gastroenterologist, and my sister is a retired nutritionist, and they didn't have any children. And they were in practice for many years in Worcester, Massachusetts, and retired back to Louisiana and built this house on Caddo Lake. And the scene that you see is taken from my house, looking towards their house. And this is a retired Army guy's house, a little bit different from a retired doctor's house. But Sue and I love it. It's real country. And you can see Louisiana irises growing there in the front. These are some of the things that we're going to talk about. So I want to go through these quickly because I know you have questions. And if I think that we'll cover most of your questions during this discussion. And if not, there'll be a time for questions at the end. But if you have just a burning question and can't wait till the end, feel free to interrupt and I'll try to answer it for you. Of course, I'm the membership chair for the Society of Louisiana Irish in the Treasury, so I'm going to try to sign you all up for membership. We're going to talk about some conservation efforts. We're going to talk about collecting the irises back in the 1930s and 50s, which really saved the Louisiana irises. We're going to talk about where the Louisiana irises fit into the Irish in the Irish genus. And then we're going to talk about the flowers and the blooms and the size and colors and the foliage and the size and colors. And then we're going to talk about the diversity that's found in Louisiana irises. It's just really breathtaking. Then we're going to talk about how to grow them, how to plant them, how to feed them. And then we're going to look at some of the hot new Louisiana irises. So with that in mind, we'll start off. And of course, I got to pitch you for membership for the Society of Louisiana Irish. It's $17 a year. We publish a quarter newsletter called the Fleur de Lis, and you learn about irises. We have an annual convention each year, except this year we didn't have one, and it's doubtful we're going to have one next year. But normally the annual convention is when we have our general membership meeting. Other than that, we don't have any meetings. And there's our website down at the bottom there, www.louisianas.org. The Louisiana iris is the official wildflower of the state of Louisiana. We had a big push in the legislature to name it as the state flower, but our state flower is the magnolia. So is Mississippi's and then Alabama's and everybody else across the South. So we tried to talk the state into changing it to the Louisiana iris, but they wouldn't do it, so they named it the official wildflower. It's grown internationally. Some of our biggest hybridizers are in Australia and New Zealand. We have members in South America and Africa and New Zealand, in Australia and Russia, and of course Canada and England. It blooms down here in Louisiana. It starts blooming down in South Louisiana around New Orleans in last of March or the very first of April, and my bloom season starts about the middle of April and then blooms through about the first or second week of May. Up north, you probably would bloom up there in June, July. Up in Tully, New York, they bloom even later than that. But we believe that Louisiana irises have the widest range of color and flower forms of any of the other flowers or any other irises. I want to show you a little bit about the conservation efforts. This is a picture or drawing that was made in 1849, and it shows the Mississippi River in New Orleans. If you look over here, there's the third municipality. And so this is New Orleans right in this area here. And the French Quarter would be down in this area. And Lake Pontchartrain to the north up here. And you can see this whole area right here is marsh. And in fact, here's a picture taken in 1867 of that area. And these are ball cypress trees growing here in the marsh. Mm-hmm. And then these are all Louisiana irises. Everywhere as far as you can see, Louisiana irises.
Wow.
Now I'll show you a picture of that today. This is a satellite picture. And this is that same area right here where New Orleans is located. And this is the big marsh that we saw previously, Lake Pontchartrain here. And this is the town of Metairie, and this is the town of Keener. And all of that has been filled in and laid over with concrete and asphalt, and there are no more irises there. At one time, all the bayous and along the rivers in South Louisiana, there were Louisiana irises everywhere. And the oil well companies would come in and they would dig canals to get access to areas they wanted to drill in, and the canals would allow salt water to come into the area. And of course, the plants didn't like that. So there are a lot of factors that deal with a lot of Louisianas being killed in South Louisiana. But we have some programs going on to reestablish Louisiana irises in the wild in Louisiana. And there's a huge Iris Society called the Greater New Orleans Iris Society, GNOS, and they're part of AIS. I forgot what you call it, affiliate. They're an affiliate of AIS, and they're also a subsection of the Society of Louisiana Iris. And so they maintain 150 distinct natural occurring forms of wild Louisiana irises. So we're talking about native species Louisiana irises. And they have a variety of projects going on. They have restoration projects as well as replanting some irises into the wild. So they're really trying to reproduce as many of these 5 Louisiana iris species as they can. And then they have these projects that they're replanting irises in. You see a list of them there, which probably is Greek to you, but if you're from this area, you recognize a lot of them. They're mainly planting them in city parks. They're planting them in, we're cooperating with the Louisiana State Wildlife and Fisheries and planting them in parks and state parks and areas like that. There are many ways that you can propagate Louisiana irises. Of course, you can grow them from seeds. When they're collecting specific species, they try to collect the species, from irises that are within if you're collecting Iris fulva, you want to make sure that you have them separated from the other species so you don't get crosses. But you can also take the rhizome and cut it into pieces, 2 or 3 inch pieces, and plant those, and they will grow and then produce new rhizomes on the side. So that's just a few of the projects that are going on between GNOS and SLI. And this is the website, if you want to note that, for the Greater New Orleans Iris Society. They have a terrific website. It is full of information and full of pictures. I think you'd really enjoy visiting that. This is their nursery in City Park. If you've ever been to New Orleans, City Park is a huge place, and it's a beautiful place. And there's a little island that's a bayou running across there. You can see with the guy in the canoe. But they have a little island out there, which is their nursery. And these are species Louisiana irises growing out there in pots on this little island. And see, there's it's probably Iris nelsoni, the red one there. And as you can see, each pot has the name of that iris, or if it's Iris nelsoni and the color. And then this is a shed that they have, and those are all pots full of seedlings up there that you see up there. So it's a huge operation. This is a picture of the irises, probably Iris nelsoni there. And another batch of And you see they're all the same iris because they're one of the species. This is actually Iris gigantica Irulia growing in the wild down in South Louisiana. You can see
That's
the
good.
marsh in the area in the back and cypress trees. So a little bit of where do Louisiana irises fit into the nomenclature. Of course, if you go over to, back up one, all right. Go over to the rooted division. Of course, there's tubular irises. I've never seen a tubular iris. I don't know if anyone else has. But then bulb irises, of course, where you have your Dutch irises and so forth. But your rooted division, if you come over, they have divided into beardless, crested, and bearded. And then down under the beardless, if you come all the way over here to Iris hexagona, you see the Louisiana irises, and below them are the species of Louisiana irises. Right next door to them in this group is where you find your Iris virginica, Iris pseudochorus, and Iris versicolor. So do any of you grow pseudochorus up there? Well, we talk about that
Not
later.
me.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll look for a minute at the parts of the iris bloom. If you grow irises, so you know what they're called, of course. I give this talk to master gardeners and to gardening groups, and a lot of times they don't know the names of the petal parts of the iris bloom. And in a Louisiana iris, you can see the style arms and the standards and the falls. So now we're going to look at, it all started many years ago when they started going out into the marshes and swamps in South Louisiana and collecting irises from the wild and bringing them back and growing them in their gardens. And so if you go back to that time of collecting, this is what a Louisiana iris looked like. In fact, Dixie Deb is a very famous Louisiana iris, and it still wins Queen of the Show quite often in some of our shows. But as you can see, they were very open form and spidery is what I call them. Sidney Conger was a morticianist in a town that I grew up in, and he and his mother were really big into Louisiana irises. John Taylor is in Australia, and so this iris came from Australia. But as you can see, the irises were, Her Highness is Iris gigantica Irulia, and I grow that one. It's a beautiful iris, and it also will win the award at the show. So then we'll look at how the irises developed over the years and look at some of the forms. This is a picture that was taken in our crawfish pond. We grow crawfish, and I had a bunch of seedlings that I didn't think were worthy of introduction. So I planted them along the edge of this pond, and every year in the spring when they bloom, I always find one that I wonder, now why did I throw that one away? I should have kept that one. The Mary Swords Deballion Award is the highest award the Louisiana Iris can win. Well, I mean, it could win the Dykes Award, ha ha ha. But so it's the highest award that a Louisiana Iris can win. So this kind of shows you the development of the Louisiana irises over the years. The first award of the Mary Swords Deballion Medal was in 1948 and was awarded to Mary Swords Deballion. So these are the award winners. And then we jump ahead, and you can see they start to get bigger and prettier. And that pretty much brings us up to date. I have to point out that I did in 2017 won the Mary Swords Deballion Award for mine that I named our friend Dick after a very good close friend.
These are all gorgeous.
So this is the first Dual White Butterfly was done by J.C. Taylor out of Australia, and it was the first Louisiana iris that came out with the ruffling on the edges.
I like ruffles.
This just kind of shows the different color range that you find in Louisiana irises. Have a lot of pastel colors that I really like. Pat O'Connor down in Metairie loves to do pastel colors, and he also names his irises for things found in South Louisiana. He's never seen a bridge or a bayou or a statue that he couldn't name a Louisiana iris after. about
Oh, my
midnight,
goodness.
used to be about the darkest Louisiana iris that you could find, but it's been replaced by a recent one. A black gamecock. Black gamecock, very common. I'm getting an echo. It's a very common Louisiana iris. And somebody's mic's on or something.
Yeah, if everybody could mute if you're not muted, unless you want to ask a question, and then we'll go ahead and unmute, because I did hear that echo too, Ron. So, and I'll follow my own advice and mute right back. Thanks, y'all.
Black gamecock is actually Iris brevicalis. Iris brevicalis is a very late blooming, it's the latest blooming of all the Louisiana species. And black gamecock sold in a lot of nurseries. You see it just about anywhere that people grow irises. Very, very famous black one. Every time I give this talk to master gardeners and to gardening groups, they all say, I grow the purple one, I grow the purple one. And they think that this is a Louisiana iris. Of course, you can look at that and tell that that is not a Louisiana iris. That's a Iris germanica, a tall-bearded iris, and it's one of the old species irises. And my wife grows the purple one, the white one, and the yellow one. But it's amazing how people in Louisiana think that they're growing the Louisiana iris with that. Iris pseudochorus is often mistaken for Louisiana irises. It's a native of Europe. It's very vigorous. This huge group of green foliage right here is Iris pseudochorus, and this is Louisiana foliage that you see here. And we're trying to get a law passed in Louisiana to make it illegal to sell this as a Louisiana iris. Marvin Grandjeur lived down in South Louisiana, down south of Lafayette, and he found and collected a natural double. And he started crossing that one and produced, I think, about 6 different doubles from that. Some very interesting flowers. The doubles have all falls and no stands. And the style arms are deformed. I think I have a picture. Yeah, here's a picture. The style arms are deformed and they have little petaloids on the end of it. You can see it sticking up here. And they can receive pollen, but they're non-fertile on the male side, so they're fertile on the female side. So they're kind of interesting to try to cross them. This is an interesting slide. Heather Pryor's in Australia also and has hybridized lots of irises. And these are all seedlings from one cross that she did. It shows you the diversity of brothers and sisters that you get when you cross one iris with another one. Louisiana irises come in sizes from 3 inches or even smaller up until a bloom that's 7 inches. The average is probably 5, 6, 7 inches. But the foliage is also varies greatly from iris. So a lot of the irises can grow real small, and some of the irises, like Iris gigantica Irulia, will be very tall. The Louisiana irises are not divided by size. So if you go and enter an iris in the show, they go in the show by their name, their registered name, and there's no division by size, except when you're judging seedlings. The seedlings are divided into small, medium, and tall. But Iris brevicalis grows real short and has smaller blooms. But Iris gigantica Irulia is really tall. I'll show you pictures of that. This is one that gets about 40 to 50 inches tall. And this is Iris gigantica Irulia that we collected on one of our tours in South Louisiana. And that's Benny Trahan and Pat Norwell from Dallas. And you can see it's taller than Benny. After they got the edging, they started getting the halos around the edge in addition to the edging. And this was done by Heather Pryor out of Australia. Donna Wolford and her husband live in Palm Bay, Florida, and can watch them when they shoot off the rockets and launch satellites down there. This was one of the first ones to come out with some veining, a lot of veining in the leaves, and it's even got a little halo, a little bit of ruffling. I love this iris. I love the name, and it sure has a lot of veining going on in it. Extra Dazzle is one of my favorites. It has the signal on all of the petals and pretty green style arms that draw your attention. And of course it has halo around it, and it grows real well for me. This one was done by Kevin Vaughn. Kevin Vaughn is a weed scientist and retired and moved up to Portland, and used to be really big into Louisianas, and now he's gone into things that grow really well up in Portland that he couldn't grow in Mississippi. And he did this one. It's not a pleasing color to me, but color's in the eye of the beholder. And so, you know, some people find it pleasing, but I thought it was an interesting iris. Ron Betzer lives down in Lafayette, which is kind of the home of Louisiana Irises. It's J.C. Taylor out of Australia. Kind of extreme amount of ruffling. And when an iris is this ruffled, it makes it very difficult for it to open fully. So bicolor, quite a few bicolor Louisiana irises. Yeah, Pat O'Connor from Metairie, as I said, he failed to find anything in South Louisiana he couldn't name a Louisiana iris for, but he does the pastel colors, and they're very pretty. He puts out some really beautiful irises. So how do you grow those Louisiana irises? Well, you can grow them in dug and lined beds. You can dig out your beds and line it with plastic, fill it back with good soil and compost. Or you can take landscape timbers and stack them up about 3 tall and design the bed in any form that you want to have your bed, and then line that bed with heavy plastic, so you're making like a small little pond. Or you can plant them in the edge of ponds or in marshy areas. You can grow them in pots, and you can, of course, grow them with other flowers, except cacti. You don't want to try to grow them with your cacti. This is taken out there at the nursery. You can see the Caddo Lake in the background back here, and those are ball cypress trees back there. And this is actually a dug bed that was dug with a backhoe and then lined with plastic and filled with a good compost. And right over on this side over here is the catfish pond, where Stanley grows big catfish and feeds them every evening. And these are raised beds. You can see the landscape timbers. The landscape timbers are put down and then lined in plastic and filled with good soil, and then plant your irises in there. Again, you can see the ball cypress trees out in Caddo Lake there. And there's that beautiful picture I took again. There's some irises growing in pots. This is the koi pond. And we have a little ledge around the edge of the pond, and you can just set your pot with your iris in it on that little ledge so that it's in 1 or 2 inches of water. We did this because the master gardeners would come out during bloom season, and of course they wanted the iris. They would see one blooming and they wanted it right then. And when it's planted, you can't do that, but if it's potted, then they can take that home with them. This is a picture of the crawfish. This is the catfish pond, and there's those irises growing over there with the ball cypress trees and Caddo Lake in the background. It's a beautiful place. Massively planted. This is a batch of Her Highness. We talked about that one earlier, this Iris gigantica Erulia, and these are all Her Highness. And over here you'd see Cashato, one named Cashato. Back in the back is Delta Star back there. And there's another picture of the irises in the lake and the pier and the boathouse and the ball cypress trees. And this is over by the koi pond again with the greenhouse in the background. And this iris is cock of the walk. Does anybody know what cock of the walk means? It's if you go down on the piers where they're loading ships, the guy that's in charge of the pier is called the cock of the walk. And this iris is very tall, and it has the distinctive Louisiana style with the standards that stand straight up and the falls that fall straight down. And I love it. Joe Masashia, Cajun Joe, we call him. He lives so far south of Louisiana, if you go past his house, you're driving in the Gulf. And he is currently the president of SLI. And there's another picture over by the koi pond, some of Stanley's toys, the biggest koi fish I've ever seen right there, and some cranes over there that spit water. And I don't know the name of that one right offhand. And this is in front of my house, just a massive planting that was planted temporarily in my garden my vegetable garden, about 10 years ago, temporarily, and they're still there. And you can grow them with other flowers. There's some pictures here growing them with some poppies over here. And up here's over by Bobby's, various things there. And this is just kind of planted out in an open area. And of course, in a situation like this where they don't get enough water and don't get enough sunlight or enough food, then you won't have very much bloom. It'll be sparse blooming. Now, this is over by the greenhouse, and there's a knockout rose bush, and this is a banana plant, and there's some Louisiana irises. This whole area right now is covered with one of the Louisiana irises, Dixie Deb. So how do you plant that rhizome? Well, if you ordered that rhizome from a nursery and they shipped it to you, the rhizome, the foliage is going to already be cut back to 3 to 5 inches. If the rhizome is too long, I've seen Louisiana iris rhizomes that were 3 or 4 feet long. If the rhizome is too long, you can just snap it off or cut it off. If you received it through the mail, you might want to soak it in water for a couple of days to give it a drink. And you plant that rhizome in some prepared beds. And of course, beds should be in a wet area, or beds should be lined in plastic to retain the water, or you're going to have to water them quite often. And you want to plant that rhizome about 1 inch or 1.5 inches below the top of the dirt. Roots deeper, so you can dig a deep hole, put the roots down in it, and then plant it about 1.5 inches. I'd say 1.5 inches would be best. Unlike tall bearded irises, Louisiana irises do not like to get on top of the soil. They like to stay below the soil, especially in Louisiana, because they get sunburned if they get up on top of the soil. So that looks like a rhizome that's ready to plant. Okay, so how do you grow them? Well, Louisiana irises are heavy feeders. Robert Treadway, who's our past president of SLI, says you cannot overfeed them and you cannot overwater them. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think you can overwater them. But when you put your Louisiana irises in water, you can't put the foliage underwater. The foliage has got to be above the water. I'm sure all of you know that. But I have seen people that would try to immerse the whole plant. Of course, they can't breathe then. They're going to die on you. But if you have them in a pot standing in water, it's best to have that pot standing in 2 or 3 inches of water. You don't really want the water to come all the way up to the top and cover the rhizome. I mean, I just don't think that's a good way to do it. And they like lots of sunshine. If they don't get enough sunshine, then you won't get much bloom. You'll have pretty foliage and maybe not much bloom. What else? Yeah, you can tell your friends you want to grow a plant that you can't overwater. My wife's killed hundreds of plants by overwatering them, and she's failed to do that with the Louisianas yet. And they do not make good cut flowers. I take them to church during bloom season, and I cut them on Saturday night and take them to church, and they're beautiful on Sunday, and by Sunday evening, they're past. There's exceptions to every policy. I said that you can't overwater them. Iris brevicalis, in its natural habitat, grows more up on the hills. So you'd have a marshy area, and then up on the hill towards the marshy area is where you'd find Iris brevicalis. And so it doesn't like to be as wet as most Louisianas do. One of the characteristics of Iris brevicalis is it has zigzag stalks, and it also has a tendency for the stalk to lean over. I mean, it's not going to fall over on the ground like some tall beardeds of mine do. It's going to lean over, and then all the flowers are going to come out looking up towards the sun. So it's almost like looking at a gladiola. But the Iris brevicalis can withstand cold better than some of the other species. But modern hybrids are grown all the way up in upper state New York. So I don't think your area is going to be too cold for them. Iris brevicalis is native to Kentucky. You'd have to go over along the Mississippi River. But if you Google Iris brevicalis and look for a map of where it grows, you'll see over along the Mississippi on the edge of Kentucky there, you can find Iris brevicalis. I generally use a commercial fertilizer because we have so many irises. If you don't have very many, you can use something like Miracle Grow. The only thing you got to watch with Miracle Grow, it's really high in nitrogen, but you can buy some Miracle Grow that's lower in nitrogen. I apply fertilizer after the bloom is over because the plant is recovering, and then you want to keep watering it all summer long, even though you only have foliage, because you want that rhizome to be happy and you want it to make new rhizomes on the side. And then about February, I start applying some fertilizer with low nitrogen. And I would suggest you feed them the same times as you feed them your tall beardids, but you might want to feed them more often and certainly water them more often.
Ron, it looks like if you wanted to use an organic fertilizer, alligator manure looks like it would work well in the way you've got them planted down there.
You go collect the manure and I'll use it. Yeah, I use chicken manure. We grow chickens, and during the summer I was getting a dozen eggs a day, and now I'm down to 3 eggs. Chicken production is based on the length of the day, and the days are getting shorter and the chicken eggs are getting lesser. But I use chicken manure out of the chicken house, and it really works great. I had always been told that it was high in nitrogen, but I had a PhD guy who knew what he was talking about tell me that's not true. And he had actually told me the balance of it. And I don't remember what it is because I don't remember much of anything anymore. But you don't want to, too much nitrogen can be too bad because it can convert to a nitrate. Fresh coffee ground or used coffee grounds or compost are good sources. Phosphorus helps the plant convert to other nutrients and so forth. Bone meal, compost are other good sources. But here's the one that we're really interested in is potassium. The potassium is what you want to, no, I'm sorry, phosphorus. Phosphorus is one that we want to be concerned with in the spring, because in the spring, nitrogen is going to make your foliage look really pretty and green and grow tall, but nitrogen is not going to make your iris bloom. So you want to put some phosphorus on it in the spring. And you can get some Miracle Grow that's like 15, 30, 15. But I found some locally that is 0-20-20 that I think is really good to use. And so I'd use that in the spring and really give them 2 or 3 times. As spring develops, like maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, put in a light feeding for them. And that'll really help you have a lot more bloom. And then potassium keeps your plants good and strong and growing, and good sources are banana peels. If you gather up enough banana peels, I guess that would work. I've been over to Dallas, Texas many times and given talks on growing Louisiana irises. They have a huge iris club over there. And I've also gone over there and given judges training classes. And finally, Fort Worth Iris Club called me and asked me if I'd come over and give them a talk on growing Louisiana irises. And there was quite a group there. And I was talking to them. They said, well, we can't grow Louisiana irises here. And I said, what do you mean you can't grow Louisiana irises here? Well, they just won't grow here. I said, well, it's funny to me. They'll grow in Dallas. It's 15 miles away from here. And there's always somebody who says, no, we can't grow them here. They won't grow. But they do. They can grow them in Dallas and Fort Worth, and grow them in Austin and all around. This is an interesting picture. You see this raised bed. I dug this raised bed and I took all the rhizomes and put them right here. And then I rebuilt the bed and put in new compost and replanted them all. And in the spring, guess what came up right here? Some of the Louisiana Irises rhizomes that I missed and just threw on the ground, there they were. So, you throw it down on the ground and it'll grow if it can reach the dirt. So let's look at some of the more recent hybridizing efforts. And so we'll go through these pretty quick. Booker Nichols is in Dallas, and his wife, Bonnie Nichols, is the judges training chair for the American Irish Society. You may have run into her or know her. this iris, Ron Betzer lives in Lafayette, but he was out in California and had his career in California and married a girl from Louisiana. And so he started hybridizing Louisiana irises because his wife loved them. And they retired and moved back to Louisiana, and he brought this seedling with him. And he thought, well, I started it in California and I finished it in Louisiana, so he named it Kayla. Iris names are interesting to me. I've written articles for the Fleur-de-Lis about iris names. It's always interesting to know where people got the name for that iris. There's that cock of the walk we talked about. And there's Joe Mushashia. Now that's a good Cajun name for you there. Erlene Sudeth was the secretary for the Society of Louisiana Irish for years and years and years and years. And Erlene's in a nursing home in Jackson, Mississippi. And it's always interesting to look at the parents too. This one is I Remember You times New Orleans Lady. So if you're really into irises, you know who their parents are. Of course, Harry Wolford from Florida names things Florida, and a lot of things Seminole this and Seminole that. Now, LSU fans will go crazy about this one, and I can't keep enough of it or the next one that I'm going to show you because this is kind of LSU colors, but this is one of my favorite top 10 of Louisiana Irises, Bayou Tiger, in the forefront here. I don't know. I think that's Roberta Rowell back there, but I don't know who. But this is a beautiful iris and has beautiful LSU colors, and everybody comes out to my house tries to sneak off with some of that. Now, this is an interesting iris done by Harry Wolford. He crossed a Louisiana iris with a Florida species and produced this interesting iris, which looks like a Louisiana iris. But he said, now this is interesting. This is the start of something big. So that's what he named it. Ron Betzer from New Orleans did this one and named it Rooster. And there's a lot going on in that iris. Another one by Harry Wolford, Mr. Sandman. Pat O'Connor, Grand Choctaw is one of the bayous down South Louisiana. And you see his names of his parents, Hurricane Colin. He named an iris for every hurricane. I said, boy, I don't know how you can produce them that fast, Pat. The hurricanes are coming too fast. That's a seedling that he hadn't named yet. And he named one Frenchman Street. You got to have a Frenchman Street. That's a beautiful, he's named this one, but I don't know its name. Beautiful red iris. I just wrote an article on red irises for the Fleur-de-Lis. So if you join, you'll get one and you'll see my article. Robert Treadway again lives in up by Little Rock, Arkansas, and he's the past president of the society. Now, this is interesting iris. There was a lady in New Orleans, a well-known lady that was mentally challenged, shall we say, that walked around in New Orleans with a duck on a leash. And she was, people saw her all the time and knew her and called her the duck lady. And she passed away. So Pat named this iris for the duck lady down in New Orleans. Now, do you see any problems with this iris? You see, this iris is so ruffled that I guarantee you it's going to have a difficult time opening. And as a judge, if that bloom can't fully open, then I can't recommend anybody growing that iris. This is one of Peter Jackson's out of Australia's newer ones. He has come out with some really beautiful red irises. This is an interesting seedling that Peter's growing. It's called, we call the umbrella form, where the only thing standing up are the style arms and everything else is falling down. Of course, Pat has lived through all kinds of hurricanes down there in New Orleans. And during Hurricane Katrina, his whole yard was covered in swamp water and oil and chemicals and everything else, killed a lot of his irises. And there was a dog, this little dog right here named Buddy, he was blinded from being in the water with chemicals. And so Pat adopted him and named him Buddy and kept him until he died just recently. But he named an iris for him, Katrina Dog, and that's the iris Katrina Dog. This is a relatively new iris, even though it's the old form. There's another black one called Black, well, it's not Black Widow, but it stands out more like a saucer. But this is really interesting iris that Rodney Burton has done. Now, this iris really blew my mind. I said, that's got to be a Japanese iris. That doesn't even look like a Louisiana iris, but it is. But you see how big the stands are as well as the falls. Unless the thing just has all, and I don't think it's all falls because it's not set up right. But anyway, I meant to talk to Peter about that one and see what the deal was. Bernard Pryor and Heather Pryor from Australia have produced a lot of irises. And they introduced those through the nursery there in your state, Greg McClure. And what's it called? And that's another.
It's actually outside of Nashville, Iris City Gardens.
Yeah, Iris City Gardens. There you go. Old age is getting to me.
That's okay.
Now, this is really interesting. I saw this one that Peter posted very recently. That is really an interesting iris. It's just beautiful to me, breathtaking. So he hasn't named it yet, but if he does introduce it, he'll be introducing it through Greg. And of course, I have to show you mine. This is one that I named our friend Tom. And that's our friend Dick, you saw earlier, that actually won the Mary Swords Rebellion Award. And this is our friend Harry. So I have every Tom, Dick, and Harry of Louisiana Irises. And this is mine that I did just recently. If you're from the South, you know what bless your little heart means. And that's its name. So how to contact me, if you want to write all this stuff down, you're welcome to do it. Take a picture of the screen. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to receive emails from you. I'm not crazy about texting. My fingers are too fat for the keys. But if you want to email me, I'd love to talk to you. If you would like to grow some Louisiana irises, I'll send you some for free. You pay the postage, but you'll have to wait till next fall. It's too late to send them now. And if you want to come and visit, we love visitors that we're expecting. So just call me in advance. And then the Society of Louisiana Iris, there's the website. If you want to like us on Facebook, that's how you do it there. And again, the website for the Greater New Orleans Iris Society. Be sure and go there. It is full of information. And our website, you can go to our website, and up in the top right corner, you can search and just search for whatever you're interested in, and then you'll find an article about it, growing irises, or how to water them, how to feed them, and so forth. Okay, I'm going to